It's good to be here and worship with you. The last time we were here, there were still some of those metal chairs. And this is quite a beautiful place right now. It's all seemingly complete with all these wonderful pews, right? And you are so blessed to have such a beautiful church in which you could worship together. You know, it's quite interesting. My wife and I has been around quite a bit. When I say that, you know, when we travel, like even yesterday when we were in Dayton for just that strawberry festival, and we found this seat, and we're seated, and there was already this man, and he turned around and he said, "Where are you from?" And obviously, he was not sure. He said, "I thought," when I said, "we are originally from the Philippines," he said, "I thought so." You know, my face is so generic that wherever I go, they kind of look at me like, "Are you from Mexico?" And, you know, it's just wonderful. When we were in, of course, first time to go to Eastern Europe, October 2013, we were in Romania, in Târgu-Mureș. First time to go there. Anyway, they look and check us out and see like, "Wow, where are you from?" Yeah, we are originally from the Philippines. And we left that country in 1977. And that was, 49 years ago? Yes, so maybe some of you are still very young, okay? Yeah, my wife and I just going to be turning only 76 this year, so we're young, okay? We're still moving, and we always work for others, and as you know, that's one of the themes that we like to share. Yeah, we worked for Guam Micronesia Mission for 27 years, and in 2004, we decided to have a little early retirement, and we decided to move to Florida. So our current residence really is in Florida, and you might be wondering what we are doing here. Well, we found ourselves over here in Laurel Brook during COVID, because the last time we were in Moldova, Eastern Europe, was in 2019, and shortly in 2020, the COVID came, and everything shut down. We were not able to travel to Moldova as our volunteer area work. And so we find ourselves, somehow the Lord has opened this door here at Laurel Brook Academy. And I found myself, somehow they asked me to help to teach, which I used to be a teacher, a Bible teacher and a social science instructor. So I found myself teaching at the school, supposedly only for 10 months. And you know how it is. God has always ways of putting things together, and we still find ourselves here. And we are volunteers, and we are not necessarily, you know, we don't get any compensation, and that's very good. We help where we could. We are not rich people. We are not billionaires like Trump, but, you know, it's a good experience working for the Lord. When, in fact, I have a friend who recently, not too long ago, visited us. He's a medical doctor. He was our doctor, a young doctor when he was at Mountain View College. And we met here about 2 years ago, and he looked at me and he said, "What are you doing here?" And, you know, he's an anesthetist he used to work in Chicago for 40 years. So anyway, the interesting part about it, just for introduction, is since I'm the host, I took him to Dayton, and we have our meal together, and I tried to pay, and I was told it's already paid. And I went back to our table, and the doctor said, "Well, I paid it because you're a volunteer. You don't have much money." It's very interesting, isn't it? When you have that kind of connotation, like you are a missionary or a volunteer, you don't really have money. And you know what I told him? I said, "You know what? You're right. I don't have much money because our investment is all direct deposit to heaven." And he looked at me like, "You know what? When you deposit in heaven, the Lord is going to give you some money, but it's like honey where it's dripping." It's not the full thing. It's dripping. And the Bible is always correct. When you are faithful to the Lord, He will never leave you and forsake you. So anyway, we would like to solicit also your prayer. We're going back to Moldova on June 8th. And there are so many things happening here and there, and also the gas price and all that. I heard all these other things like, yeah, they're cutting off airline travels, like 200, all these things. But I told my wife, by the way, I tried to call the Lufthansa and, the airline and says, well, we would like to maybe cancel. And he said, well, you can do that, but we are going to hold about $1,000 for what you have paid. So anyway, that's the end. We are going there anyway, and we need your prayers because God is always in the business of getting us ready for His kingdom and helping people to know about this truth. And so we have, and if you are wondering what is in Moldova, we have a lifestyle center. In case you don't know what that is, how many of you are acquainted with Wildwood? Okay, it's almost like Wildwood, except that this is more like a bigger place. When I mean, like we used to have only 50 bedroom for the residents to come for 10 days, and now we have about 75 bedrooms. And the mother, actually, when we say the organization that helped open us is from Hergilia in Romania. So we have such a beautiful place there, and in fact, good news is that they have what you call almost a year and a half of backlog. You can't just go there now because the patients have already been booked for about a year and a half. So that's how the work is going there. And so my wife and I, when we go there, we help in areas like spatially. It's like my designation is like a chaplain, taking care of all the religious activities for workers during the session on 10 days, and then on weekends I am on different churches. So it's always good to see all the work going on, and a very beautiful experience working for the Lord. Now you notice that in your program, somehow the title, it is, as I was asked that I need to give my information. And I was almost not really wanting to give information because I was following an example of one of my retired friends, a minister. He said, when I asked him, can you give me the title of your sermon? He said, I'm not going to give you any title. I will not give you any of my scripture reading. Let's just put there whatever. And I asked, for what reason? Well, I don't like the devil to know what I'm preaching, and then he's going to discourage people coming to church. Well, that's not necessarily, perhaps that might be happening to some people. But you are here, and we are grateful. So I'd like for us to go back to your Bible, if you please. Let's look at the Bible verse that I have shared this morning, and that is in the book of Romans, chapter 15, verse 4. Now, Apostle Paul here has written some kind of encouragement, a letter of encouragement to the people of Rome, and part of this about bearing others' burdens and trying to help others. And so one of the things that he mentioned in verse 4, he said, for whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. So this is a picture of what we are supposed to be learning through what the Bible has given us, some of the names. When in fact, I would like to quickly go to Hebrews chapter 12, if you please, because I would like to connect these verses together. And on chapter 12, and that will be on verse 1. It says that, therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily it snares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. So we are surrounded with witnesses, and what this particular chapter really is referring on those names on chapter 11. But today I'd like to share with you this family story of Isaac, Rebekah, Esau, and Jacob. Now you notice that somehow this family is really a wonderful family. But I'd like also to mention here this morning that even though this very family has a direct connection with the Lord, they got some specific problems. So we're going to look at this in a perspective this morning, but before I would do that, I would like to read this particular statement here. Book of Patriarchs and Prophets, page 238. Before I will relate and see what's happening with this family of Isaac, Rebekah, Esau, and Jacob. It says here, men whom God favored and to whom he entrusted great responsibilities were sometimes overcome by temptation and committed sin, even as we all at the present day strive, waver, and frequently fall into error. Now, I'd like to repeat that. Remember, Isaac, his father was Abraham, right? A very special man who was called by God. Correct? And listen to this statement now. Men whom God favored and to whom he entrusted great responsibilities were sometimes overcome by temptation and committed sin, even as we at the present day strive, waver, and frequently fall into error. So what the Bible verse I shared with you on that verse 4 of chapter 15 is really for us to look through this particular experience. Now, who is this family, or who was this family? Okay, let me just share with you this according to Patriarchs and Prophets. You know, before the birth of, by the way, Isaac was 40 years old when he got married with Rebekah. All right? Now think of that for a while. 40 years old. And 20 years later, which before the birth of this twin, Isaac prayed because Rebekah was not able to bear a child. So according to Genesis chapter 25, that Isaac prayed for his wife. And eventually she became pregnant. And when she got pregnant, she noticed that there was something. She was very uncomfortable. And in fact, she prayed, Lord, what is going on in my, literally my stomach? It looks like there is a struggle. And if you are going to look at Genesis chapter 25, it would relate to you that the Lord spoke to her and said that you have a very special boys coming up. The older one will be serving the younger one. Now think for a moment. This is what God was telling Rebekah, and Rebekah told Isaac. They will have a twin, and when the boys were born, sure enough, they have. For whatever reason, the Bible says that the first one came out like he was hairy and red. I can't imagine what that is. I mean, But the picture that the Bible says that as this Esau was coming out, somehow the hand of Jacob was holding on the heel of the older brother. Now, it sounds like there is a kind of a, like a symbol here. grubbing, which in a literal sense, later on as both boys were born, interestingly, they really have different personalities. And I'd like to share this statement here, that when Jacob and Esau, the twin of Isaac, present a striking contrast both in character and in life. When in fact, Esau, listen to this now, in the lineage of Abraham through Isaac, who has its connection directly from the Lord. Esau grew up loving self-gratification and centering all his interests in the present. When in fact, he was impatient of restraint and he delighted in the wild freedom of the chase and early chose the life of a hunter, which his father, Isaac, loved this boy and became a favorite. All right? Now, Jacob, on the other hand, he was a thoughtful, diligent, and caretaking, ever thinking more of the future than the present, was content to dwell at home. In other words, he is more just like a homebody, just like to stay at home. He is not the adventurous one. So there is the contrast, all right? Now, the point that I'm driving here is that Rebekah knew that somehow this Jacob will be the one that will really inherit this particular birthright. But how it will be, we are going to find that out later. Because in the life of Esau, Esau was more, he wants to have freedom. And both of them were instructed by Isaac, the father, that if you want to have the birthright, you are supposed to think about being the priest of the family. Now, which Esau did not like that kind of responsibility. He hated to think about the spiritual things. So it's a choice that he made. He said, I don't like that. All I like is the literal inheritance of the material things. But as far as spiritual things, he doesn't really care. In fact, the description is mentioned here, that somehow this is what is supposed to be when you have the birthright. Now, Isaac made known to his sons these privileges. In fact, he made the real condition for this and stated to Esau that as an eldest son, he is really entitled for this birthright. But remember earlier, Rebekah was told that the younger one will be the head. And Rebekah did not really know how is this going to be accomplished. And if we are going to read through this process, where, this particular family, which has its all direct lineage as called by God through Abraham, and they have all the messages, a direct message from heaven of what responsibility that they have. And yet we can see in this picture, these two boys, somehow, as they were growing, the younger one has a desire to really want to follow what the Lord wants him to do. And he desired to have that particular spiritual experience of being a part of Abel to be the high priest of the family. But he could not do that because he's the younger one. Rebekah has always been telling him that God is going to make you as the inheritor. How to accomplish that, he doesn't really know. And Isaac made it very clear when in fact Isaac was determined that it will be Esau. So there is that particular family where there is that tension, but they just seem to put that aside as the boys were growing up. That eventually when the reality came as Isaac grew old, when in fact on that very day as he was saying, I'm about to die and now I am ready to give the birthright. And one of the things that has to be done is that the older boy has to prepare this stew. That is, part of the protocol before I am going to give you the blessing. So without letting Rebekah know about what's happening, he told Esau to go out there and get and hunt and bring that stew, and I will bless you. Now, unbeknownst to Isaac, he was trying to keep this secret, but somehow Rebekah heard about it. And so you know the story, right? Somehow Rebekah told Jacob, this is what I want you to do, while his brother was out there hunting. And so as we see the narrative here, it's really building up a little more on a drama where Jacob was telling the mother, Rebekah, I can't do this. I can't go in there. I will be cursed if I'm going to tell a lie. But the mother said, don't worry about it. It will be on me. So if you look at this, my brothers and sisters, you notice that this family has a direct communication from the Lord. But why is Isaac and even Rebekah seem to be doing their own thing here? What's happening? Well, they're as human as you are, right? Now let me ask you here. How many of us, we go to church, we are here, we call ourselves as church members, and I know God's promises in all of these things, that I should be obedient, I should be faithful, and then you find yourself doing something contrary. How many of you have experienced that? I'm going to raise my hand. Yeah, there are times that I go the other way. But God has a way of putting us back on track. In fact, the drama here was so real, and it is, so compelling that when Esau was out there getting that venison, hunting there, Jacob and the mother was getting all this stew ready. And you know the story, right? The deception was so dramatic, and sometimes I ask myself, how can that be? Because his brother was hairy, and he was kind of a smooth guy. So how to go in there? Well, there was some manipulation, and I can't believe in how these things happen. But it happened anyway, because when Jacob went in there, and the father said, how come you are so able to come soon? And there was that kind of narrative. Well, the Lord has provided me in all that. Now, using the name of the Lord in all to deceive the father. But anyway, the deception was so successful that the blessing was given. Now, think for a moment. In our human perspective, that is almost like, how can that be? But it happened. And so as far as the time is concerned and all that, when Jacob received all the blessings as the first son, supposedly, the birthright was provided, being the high priest, and at the same time also getting all the material blessings, all put together in a package. And shortly after he left that room, I don't know how many minutes, here comes Esau. And you know that drama, as you will see. Esau cried. So what is this all about? Well, you notice that God is in the business of making sure that the plan of redemption will be fulfilled. We all make mistakes, and I will go back to this particular statement that I read earlier, Patriarchs and Prophets. Men whom God favored and to whom he entrusted great responsibilities were sometimes overcome by temptation and committed sin, even as we all at the present day strive and waver frequently and fall into error. Their lives, with all their faults and follies, are open before us, both for our encouragement and warning. If they had been represented as without fault, we, with our sinful nature, might despair at our own mistakes and failures. So what I am understanding in this quotation is that the failures of these wonderful people like Isaac, Rebekah, and Jacob has a great lesson for us today. Not to commit the same mistake of not trusting God. But you see, the story, and I would like to isolate now Jacob, he has to leave home as a result of that deception. But then as he traveled towards, and by the way, before that he was given the blessing. The father told him that, yes, you can go. And the blessing will be with you. So he was heading towards Mesopotamia. But the first evening as he was traveling, his heart was really, he was really burdened, and it was a sad experience. Never thought he will never see his parents again. Never. But here's the most beautiful part, and I'd like for us to receive this encouragement today. In spite of his deceitful acts, in spite of his being, sinful, God appeared to him that evening. So what is that telling you and me? That in spite of our being sinful, God is not going to forsake you. The consequence will be there, but he is still going to love you just the same. After all, that is his promise. John 3:16. For God what? So loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son. That is referring to you and me. Yes, this story is not just written just because it has to be written. This is for our encouragement even now. Because as you notice, Jacob received a special blessing from the Lord that evening by allowing him to have that dream, that ladder, and able to see that vision or that dream that he is connected in heaven in spite of his deceitfulness, that the Lord has forgiven him. But remember, my brothers and sisters, he was forgiven, but the consequence was not removed. Because what happened? If we fast forward, he went and be able to see what? He went to Mesopotamia and able to see his uncle Laban, and shortly after, got attracted to Rachel and proposed that I'm going to work what? 7 years? And of course, Laban, in his calculated mind, he said, well, it's great. Without Jacob knowing that there is a cultural, some kind of practice. Because after 7 years, what happened? There's a wedding, right? Oh, man, it's exciting. I mean, here is Jacob having like, wow, I'm going to have Rachel. She's beautiful. And only to find out it was who? How will you feel? He was angry, but then he remembered what he did to his brother. And how he deceived his father. He was supposed to be like angry, but he could not really be angry knowing that he did this foolishness anyway in the first place. But then he was given some kind of a lecture that here is the culture, the tradition here. You can't marry the younger one. You got to have the older one first. So he has to work another what? 7 years. So you see the consequence of what he did is constantly reminding him. Because fast forward, even with all of these particular experiences, when he was ready to go, as he was told by the Lord to go back to Canaan. You know the story, right? He was not really ready to go. He was afraid because he remembered his brother is going to kill him. So it was actually a moment of despair. But there is no way he could stay with his uncle Laban anymore. He has to go. After all, that is what has been promised. But as he was nearing home, you noticed he was really struggling. He was putting all this together in his mind. How can I feel sorry for my family. And you know what happened that evening, right? He went and crossed to the other side and have to spend time with the Lord. See, the point here, my brothers and sisters, is this. The wrestling, in fact, the wrestling of Jacob has some kind of a lesson for us today. And let me just share something here that we need to understand about this particular experience. Let me just take this out here. The takeaway from this experience of Jacob wrestling with God, or wrestling with his, as he thought, an angel. It was actually Jesus that he was wrestling. This is actually a lesson for us today, a profound lesson of spiritual transformation before the blessing is going to be received. Transformation through struggle. The wrestling here represents the inner and often a painful struggle to align one's sinfulness into the will of God. So this particular experience of Jacob wrestling with his angel is really a painful struggle so that he will be able to be realigned back to the will of God. Number two, our vulnerability really equals our strength. Here, Jacob was only blessed after being crippled. You know what happened? There was an infliction of pain. And it was even when he was in pain, the more he clung to this particular angel. And in fact, as the story goes, that he was told to let me go, and he said, I'm not going to let you go, even though he was in pain. I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. So what is that applied for you and me? Yes, there will be struggles that we'll be going through. All of us here today, we are anxiously waiting for Jesus to come. But remember, God is not going to remove those challenges. But one thing for sure, as you struggle and as you are waiting for Him, in spite of all the pains, He's going to bless you. Now, in this instance of Jacob, the blessing was what? It was so beautiful, right? Yes, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to change your name, because the name Jacob is actually a connotation of it being a deceiver. And now I'm going to change your name, and it will be Israel, which has a connotation just like you're now a prince of God. You know, this particular story has its bearing of what you and I, in fact, in the great controversy is that in the last days, God's people will go through Jacob's trouble. The question for you and me today, how am I going to prepare for that? You know, our lesson study is so beautiful today about prayer life. It's not about learning to pray later on. It's right now. And you're not talking about emergency prayer. Yes, some of us are victims of that. We kind of pray some kind of emergency. And I remember this vividly. One time I was doing a canvassing work. This was in the Philippines. And I happened to meet this, one Sabbath, this particular man came to me. He said, my name, I forgot his name now, but he was a businessman. He said, you know, I'm a businessman. Let me tell you something. He was telling me a story. And it was such an incredible story. He said, you know, for almost 10 years, I have not been attending church. But, you know, I'm a businessman, and I was getting all this money, and all my business was doing good. And I have to make a trip, he said one time, from Mindanao to go to Manila, you know, to do more transaction for business. But remember, Seventh-day Adventist, he said, but he has never been in church for 10 years. But on this particular flight, and he was in Manila, he was able to do all the transaction. It was the going back on that flight that suddenly he noticed that the plane, somehow that part of the engine was fire. And there was that announcement that they're going to have an emergency landing. That what came to his mind right away, this is what he's telling me. I was so scared that he made that prayer like, Lord, if you save me this time, I will promise you I'll go to church. And guess what? The Lord answered this prayer. The plane was able to land, emergency landing. He was able to get home. The next Sabbath, he was in church. And he was there for the following Sabbath for almost 3 months. And when things went well, he went back to his old ways. But somehow, something happened in one of his business transactions. Heated argument with another businessman. And this is what he was telling me. As they were having this conversation, this other businessman got so angry, got his gun and shot him. And he was hit right, he said, on this part. And he was on the floor. The thing that came to his mind is, Lord, please save me. And if you save me this time, I will really go and be faithful to you. I don't think he was able to tell me that story if he was, he was telling me now, so he's back in church. But it took a gunshot to really bring to his mind that pain, almost death, close call. The reason I'm sharing this, sometimes we don't have to wait for those close calls. So my question for you and me today, since we are waiting for this Jacob's trouble coming soon, how is it with you? Is it business as usual? We come to church, enjoy the singing, listen to the wonderful message, and go home? Well, that seemed to be the normal thing to do. But there should be even what? A greater intensity of having that close walk with the Lord. The reason why we have this lesson study and all this given, because there is a purpose for that. We need to have some change. Just like Jacob, we have to wrestle with God. So I would like to think for us today. And before I close this one, I'm going to share this song with my wife. And then I will conclude this. The title of this song is, It Is Not the First Mile That We Will Be judged by. So it is a reminder to us, brothers and sisters, when it comes to a race, it's not the first mile. So we have this spiritual race going on. So it's not the first mile that is so important. It's the last mile. So I'd like to remind all of us here today, the journey is going and it's ongoing and it will be going until Jesus will come. So the question is, when he comes, are you able to lift your hand and say, this is my Savior, come. I've waited for you. And so I hope that as we think of the life of Isaac, Rebekah, Esau, and Jacob, that certainly we need our own personal growth to be well connected, well grounded in our relationship with the Lord. May God bless us all as we continue to serve him. We're going to.
Thank you so much for that wonderful message. In light of the fact that tomorrow is Mother's Day, we have prepared something for mothers. Initially, I'd like to read a poem, and then I would like to invite the children to come forward as we pass the roses to the mothers. We've all been blessed by mothers, those who still have mothers today. A mother's love is like no other. It's unconditional and pure. A bond that lasts forever. A love that will endure. Through every joy and every trial, she's always by your side. With her loving arms around you, she will help you through the tide. She's there to wipe away your tears and celebrate your every win. A mother's love is a precious gift, a treasure deep within. So on this special day, let's take a moment to say, thank you, Mom, for all you do and for your love that's always true. Happy Mother's Day, everyone.